Just on the announcement by the Sudan resident coordinator, you may have seen that on Saturday, the Sudanese Congress Party and other opposition figures were banned from traveling out of the country to Paris. And I just wonder, how does this relate to this announcement of welcoming? Is the UN concerned that Sudan continues to block opposition figures from traveling out of the country? How does it relate also to freedom of the press, where there have been a number of newspapers with their full circulation seized?
Well, those are distinct issues. Obviously, the fact that we've seen some improvements on the humanitarian side doesn't preclude the fact that we still have concerns about human rights in Sudan, and those concerns continue, including involving the treatment of political parties and of the press. And we do continue to call on the Sudanese government and the authorities to respect freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and other basic rights.
I guess I'm just saying, because I've seen Ms. Rueda's full statement, and none of those issues were mentioned in it. And it just sort of seems like, isn't it like the UN looking at all of these issues?
Yes, it is. She's giving credit on one aspect, and so that statement is directed to one particular aspect of the issue. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other aspects that we continue to be concerned about, and our human rights concerns remain and are on the record. Yes.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, these Burundian talks facilitated by Mr. Mkapa, it's emerged. I'd asked this in December, I guess, in writing to you, but one of his team members, and that's being supported by the UN, is a person that's listed in the November 2009 DRC sanctions report as being a supporter of CNDD-FDD, and there's actually some allegations that he was involved in helping to arm them. So I'm just wondering, what is the relationship between the UN's support of these talks and what many are calling a lack of inclusiveness and the inclusion of people that are listed in UN sanctions reports?
Well, obviously the sanctions remain in place, and it's a matter for the Security Council and its relevant sanctions committees to make sure that those sanctions are implemented. We at the UN, of course, respect those sanctions. That's a separate issue from the need for mediation. Of course, we need to make sure that all mediation efforts, including those under former President Mkapa, are supported, and we're continuing to do so with our officials in the region.
But have you seen the response by large parts of the Burundian opposition that the most recent round is the most one-sided yet, and that it's virtually, I mean, they're not really included? So what's the UN's role in these talks?
We're certainly aware of the objections by the various sides. We're trying to make sure that as the process continues, it can be as inclusive as possible. And we'll continue, including through Jamal Ben Umer's office, to try to reach out to all the various parties. Yes.
Sure. I wanted to ask you about, in Bahrain, there was these execution of 3 people. Some people, human rights activists have said they were probably tortured. Anyway, their execution has set off unrest, including the setting ablaze of City Hall. And I'm just wondering, what is the UN? Is there any response from the UN, both either to the executions or to the unrest that's followed?
As you're aware, we have our long-stated concerns about capital punishment, and we would restate them here. You're well aware that we do oppose the continued institution of capital punishment, and those concerns apply in this case as well. Regarding demonstrations, of course, we hope that any demonstrations against this would be peaceful, but certainly we hope that the authorities will allow for freedom of expression and freedom of assembly.
Sure. I want to ask about, I guess, Cyprus and then also UN reform. I'm sure you've seen the coverage of the Cyprus talks. A large number of the stories said that the Greek foreign minister and the Secretary General didn't get along, and with that quote, here's a quote from one of the stories. Guterres was so irritated that he has refused to sit in the same room as the Greek foreign minister in the foreseeable future. There are at least 3 different articles and 3 separate media saying this. So I'm just wondering, how would you characterize the participation of the Greek foreign minister and the Secretary General's view going forward on his participation?
No, I mean that's not accurate. What I would say is that the Secretary General has been dealing and will continue to deal with all the various sides regarding this. You'll have seen what the Secretary General said last week, and I would just refer you back to the text of what he said. We continue to hope that there will be an agreement. Obviously, we want to make sure that this is a lasting and sustainable agreement, and we will work in good faith with all the various sides.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you about this memo, the terms of reference for new/revised Office of Executive Secretary General posts and units that talks about, basically it involves the creation of a couple of new ASG spots. It says that it will be, all of this is for 6 months and to be reviewed, and has this organogram at the back. What I'm wondering is is it accurate to assess that this involves new ASG posts, i.e. more spending? How does it relate to the Fifth Committee? And it was said here last week that the way to keep track of when people's contracts runs out is to look at vacancy announcements. So I wanted to ask you, will, for example, the Undersecretary General positions in DPA and DPKO, will there be a vacancy announcement, or is this something that will be done without any kind of public notice?
Well, I don't have anything to add to what Stefan said about that, which is exactly to look at the vacancy announcements. As you monitor those, that will become clear. Regarding any additional expenses, if there are additional expenses that need to be made, we would inform the member states, and particularly the Fifth Committee, about that. At this stage, we're in the early days of this process, and there's no concrete requests to make for additional spots.
But like Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination and Senior Advisor on Policy, these are spots that are already in the budget?
There's some that will be in the budget. There's some that will be part of extra budgetary processes. If there is a need for further budgetary allocations, we'll inform the member states accordingly.
And then finally, there were some members of the transition team that I've never seen it announced that they've become UN officials, but in going to 38 for photo ops and other, they're there. So I'm just wondering, is there some way we can get a chart of like who's actually working up there, particularly the people that were on the transition but haven't been subject to any kind of press release since then in terms of what their position is?
Well, until the end of January, they're formally regarded as part of the transition team. Once January has ended, the transition period is over, and they will either have new positions or will go back to other jobs. But right now, their formal titles really has to do with their status as part of the transition team. That process is ongoing through this month. Have a good afternoon, everyone.